Technology is the most powerful change in the world of education.
Everything changes.
Welcome to the Emerging Technologies in Education podcast, delivered to you by Clever Books Company.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast series. And today we have David Weston, Chief Executive for Teachers Development Trust. David, hello.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure. And I hope that you can tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what you do. That would be fantastic to start with.
Thank you. Yes, so my background is a teacher. I spent 10 years teaching maths and science around different schools in England, particularly in the southeast. And after 10 years of teaching, I was getting more and more involved in training other teachers. And I was also really interested in how we measure the effectiveness of teachers, how as teachers we're learning about what we're doing. And one of the things I discovered was that really most of the things that teachers get in terms of development on the job is pretty much what the research says we shouldn't have, as in it's the, lectures sat at the end of the day when we're very tired, or we go out to hotels and conference centers and we listen to things that don't sound relevant, or we hear great ideas but we have no time to put them into practice. So this frustrated me a lot, and I was inspired also by reading some of the research of what does work, and these fantastic communities where teachers work together and they get great research and great expertise. And I decided I wanted to do something about it. So I set up the Teacher Development Trust charity in 2012. It's a non-profit. We mainly work in England and Wales, and we wanted to campaign and say, do you know what? Every school, every teacher should have great professional development. They should have a wonderful career where they're constantly growing and developing, and they have access to the best expertise from across the world, not just what's in their head right now. So I've been working on that for the last 5 years. And as a charity, we campaign and we try and raise the profile and say this is the most important topic we can be talking about. How do we grow our teachers to help our students? We also directly help schools. We have all sorts of things we do with schools to help them understand what they're doing and do it better and make time for CPD and make sure that they're really developing teachers well. And then finally, we also work with training providers and say there's some great research about how you can do your job better, and here's how we can do it. So that in a nutshell is what I've been doing the last 15 years.
Wow, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. It's absolutely amazing, and you're totally right. There is a need for teachers to have additional information and practical information and ideas, and also resources that can help them to excel themselves also within the classroom. That's right.
Yes, definitely.
David, can you tell me a little bit more about your opinion, your professional opinion on the use of technology in education? Is it positive? Is it negative? And maybe also why it's the way it is?
Okay, well, so first of all, my background, you need to understand from even the age of 10 or 11, I was massively into technology. My dad ran a business from our home, and so quite early on, even in the early 90s, we had these sort of this modem and the dial-up connection and the technology. I ended up doing an A-level, an advanced level study when I was just 12, 13 in computing, because I was massively into it, and I ended up studying engineering and computing at university as well. So I've always been really fascinated by technology. So then a lot of people say, why is there not more technology in education? And for me, I guess there is huge potential, but I think we've seen loads of mistakes as well. The first mistake I think people make is they say, wow, we can replace teachers with technology. And for me, at the heart of great teaching is a relationship. It's the teacher understanding and connecting with the student believing in that teacher, so that that teacher can push them through challenges and say, do you know what, you might not know the way forward, but I can. And that relationship, that's the hardest thing to do with technology. So in a sense, I think we've been asking the wrong questions. Sometimes I think what we could do much better is say, how do we give teachers a toolkit which can empower them to make schools even more effective than they are now? And I think sometimes we've seen some really good work there. And in particular, there are some fantastic online simple tools which teachers and students can use to improve communication, to make sure there's less time wasted in classrooms. And I think that's very exciting. Trouble is also there's lots of money in this. So in the UK, for example, there was a massive explosion, huge investment, billions spent on interactive whiteboards. And what they didn't do was ask the teachers. They didn't say, what do you need to help you teach? They said, you need an interactive whiteboard and you must use it. And I remember myself going into these classrooms with interactive whiteboards and they look so shiny and lovely, but it was a huge pain. And I used to avoid as much as I could using them because in most cases it wasted minutes and minutes out of my lesson. They kept not being set up properly. The computers were too slow. They kept crashing. And I ended up going back to the manual technology. And for me, that's exactly what was wrong with technology. We're trying to help the teachers, but we end up hindering them. So I think we could do a lot. I'm very excited about some of the use of really flexible, almost artificial intelligence-led software that can prompt students to make better decisions. I think it's incredible now the amount of information that students have at their fingertips at home, using the internet, using various different websites. But I don't think we're there yet. I think somehow, unless we focus on helping students have a great learning relationship with other people and not just trying to replace the relationships, then I don't think we're ever going to really achieve the promise of educational technology.
Okay, very interesting opinion. So what you're saying is, if I understood it correctly, first of all, the teachers still need the traditional teaching, and the technology will be used as supplementary. Did I understand that correctly?
So I think, yes, in some cases, yes. And the reason for that is this. If there are not many people who can study all by themselves independently. There are all sorts of people who obviously have, they taught themselves programming or they taught themselves a language, but most people who try and self-study in an area, well, they fail because they come to a point where they find it too hard, they get stuck, they get lost, they run out of time. If we want more people to learn and not just the ones who are lucky enough to get over those barriers or they happen to have the support they need, then we need teachers involved in it. We need people saying, do you know what, here's a route that you can follow that will help, and get a great relationship with me and I'll guide and support you through the learning process. So rather than looking at a minority of people who teach themselves using the internet, using self-study sites, I think we need to say, how do we help most people learn and not just the lucky few? And that's why I think technology should assist teachers wherever possible, rather than try and replace teachers. And I think we need to look at where we can get the most success for most people rather than just replicating areas where only a few people are successful. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And as far as I understand that the technology providers have to give the full support for teachers to educate them how to easily implement what has been created. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, I think so. And it really, a great relationship between the technology providers and the teachers, so that the teachers are constantly explaining what they need. I think that's really important. I think there's probably been another problem, which is many teachers like me love technology. They love technology just because of the technology itself. They're excited by technology. And the trouble is, if those are the teachers you're listening to about how to use technology in schools, well, they're not the normal teacher. I mean, I get really excited about a new piece of technology and I'd sometimes try and use it in my classroom, not because it's what I really need, just because I find it exciting. But for 95% of teachers, they're not that excited. For them, it's the teaching that's the most exciting, and they need the right tools to make that teaching easier. So I sometimes think that technology providers speak to sort of a very small number of teachers who are just incredibly excited by all technology, and they forget that maybe not all teachers are like that. So it's having relationships between kind of ordinary teachers in classrooms day in, day out, and saying, we're going to make your life easier, we're going to empower you to work with students, we're going to empower students to work with you, and not get stuck in a little bubble of kind of the real tech enthusiasts who might go a bit too far sometimes.
Okay. Yes, that makes sense. And you already mentioned a little bit about this, but maybe you can give a little bit more on why do you think the teachers actually may reject the technology in the classroom?
Well, starting with my own experience, sometimes if you put something in my classroom which I don't understand why it's there, then I'm not gonna accept it. Essentially, the first thing we need to do with teachers is say, do you know what? Let me show you how your life could be better with technology. That's before the technology even arrives. And you've got to get teachers to really believe, wow, there's this better option for me. And I think in lots of rollouts, they don't do that. Someone at the top decides this will be better for you all, but the teachers themselves don't believe it. The second thing is, if they believe it could be better, they then need to believe they can use it. You need to do lots of training. You need to have lots of support. You need to have lots of technicians around who can just smooth out any problems. You need to invest in the infrastructure so that when the technology is in there, it's not held up by slow internet or broken computers or, other issues around just bad setup of classrooms and technology. So people got to believe in it. They've got to feel the support is there. And then finally, there's got to be a community of teachers who feel they see how they're continuing to develop and use this technology. It's not just something that appears once and then falls out of fashion. There's got to be an ongoing effort to keep embedding it in the way they teach. And I think often we've missed all three. When I think of the interactive whiteboards, for example, I didn't want them. I said, oh, that might be quite exciting. What I didn't want someone to do was take away my nice big whiteboard and replace it with an interactive whiteboard. I would have liked both, but not one. No one asked me. The second thing is, they put it in my room. I'm a bit of a technology enthusiast, as I've said. Even I found it a bit difficult to use. And I certainly found that the technical support wasn't there. The computers were too slow. The internet was too slow. Calibration wasn't working. And that was the second issue. And then third, my team didn't work together. My fellow physics teachers and I, we didn't sit there and say, how can we make this lesson better using the interactive whiteboard? We never had time for those discussions. And so all of those three things ended up meaning that it was expensive technology I never really wanted, it wasn't supported properly, and we weren't embedding it into our teaching. So really, looking back on it now, it was bound to not work. And I guess probably not surprising, a few years later, all these interactive whiteboards were being taken off the wall and put into storage because teachers just didn't want them.
Interesting. Okay. So it's, in a sense, it's a lack of preparation before the product is released, the new technology is released, and I guess the companies haven't done enough research to understand what the challenges that teachers are facing and what's exactly their opinion on such a new technology.
So it's work before to lay the ground and help understand people's issues, and work during as well, and say it's the ongoing support. Now, actually, I think the government at the time can take some blame. As I understand it, a lot of the technology providers said, look, we don't just want to sell you a whiteboard, we want to sell you a whiteboard and support. But the government probably looked at them and said, oh, you're just jacking the price up. You really want a high price so that you're making more money. And they said, no, just give them the whiteboards and they can deal with everything else. And that was a problem because, of course, schools ended up getting given these whiteboards and they didn't want to spend lots of their own money on the support. I think it was a problem right from the beginning, actually, that they didn't roll out slowly. They didn't not only sell the whiteboard, but also sell the training and the technical support. They didn't do an audit of the schools to make sure that they had the infrastructure in place. They didn't do work with teachers so that you could get a few champions going around and supporting and helping. I think all of these things could have worked better. And to be honest, we've seen the same issues with mass adoption of one-to-one technology in tablets and notebooks, for example. People haven't piloted carefully. They've just rolled out in a fit of enthusiasm. They didn't get people on side. They didn't do the homework. They didn't do the ongoing support. And ultimately, it ended up not working, which is a shame because now there are teachers who think, oh, technology doesn't work. Whereas I think, you and I probably both believe it has great potential for the future. But I think now there are lots of people who are very cynical and skeptical, saying, well, it didn't work before, maybe it won't work now. And I think we can have great rollouts and great use of technology, but we've sort of poisoned the well, if you like, with bad experiences. And there's a lot of work to do to build trust back up.
Yes, I totally agree on that one. And
it's an interesting one. I think we can solve it, though. I think we can solve it.
Sure, I guess that's something that we have to work on. And
yes, I think so.
David, can you tell me, maybe from your own experience, what technology is mostly used in the class in the UK, for example?
So I'm not going to pretend to have gone into every subject area and every department. I think the things I'm seeing used more and more you are probably simple things like visualizers. Visualizer is something which I'm seeing more and more, just such a wonderful, simple tool where teachers can just take a piece, magnify something from the screen that they're working on up onto the screen, and everyone can work together. And for example, I've seen teachers go around with visualizers and they can say, hey, everyone stop. I'm just going to show you an image of what this student has written. And they magnify it up on the board, and they maybe leave an image up on the board, and then they draw on top of it and can show information about why this is good and what they can work on next. And there's great opportunity for learning. It's such a simple piece of technology, but it enables us to do something we could have never done before. And that, for me, that's perfect. That's exactly the sort of technology we should be thinking about. So I think I've seen those used well. I've seen lots of schools try very hard to do rollouts of Chromebooks and iPads and things like that. I've seen many try. I've also seen lots of failures, I suppose. In some cases, I've seen schools which have done really great work, and eventually they've managed to build this culture up where a lot of the work they do is done, for example, via Google Suite and Google Docs and spreadsheets and so on. I think they're a lot more realistic now than they were when they started, and now there are some areas they don't use the technology for. But I have seen some successful rollouts of those. I still don't think it's for everyone. I don't think every school should be aiming to do one-to-one programs. I'm not sure it's right unless you've got the champions in the school. What other technology? To be honest, the technology that excites me a lot at the moment, probably because of the work that I do day to day, is the technology that supports teachers learning from each other and with each other. I think it's very exciting seeing the cameras and the cloud-based video systems where teachers can put a camera in the back of their classroom. That video can be shared live with their colleagues in different schools. They can record clips, they can annotate it. I've seen systems where you've got a teacher have a little headphone in their ear and they're being live coached as from someone who could be hundreds of miles away, watching that lesson, supporting them and saying, pause a minute now, go over to that child there. Oh, you'll need to re-explain that again. I've seen fantastic examples where teachers plan lessons together and using simple cloud-based tools, whereas previously you might have been the only economics teacher in your school. Now you can access a whole community and you can plan lessons together and just use simple tools to share resources. And I think that's really exciting. And I also think there are some really interesting ways where people can just use simple things like video calls and make themselves feel less isolated, have coaching conversations, do training. So for me, it's actually using technology we've had for a long time, but just using it to help teachers to help each other. And I'm very excited by that. And actually, there are so many schools who are isolated. They're in rural areas. They have no other schools nearby. And suddenly those teachers feel connected to an international community of teachers and educators. And wow, imagine the potential there if we can draw on the shared brain of everyone using these technologies.
Wow, that's interesting. It's an interesting concept overall. Are you able to share any resources that you actually use and tools for teachers to be able to try and implement it?
Well, I mean, honestly, the simplest tools we're seeing people use are things like just using a Google Doc, actually, and saying, once you show teachers the ability to say, look, across your 10 schools, why don't you, all of you who work on this particular area, just pool ideas using a simple cloud-based document? And suddenly they get very excited by that. And suddenly most of them didn't even know you could do that. And suddenly you've got a dynamic live resource where they all know, I'm going to teach electric circuits. Right. Hey, there's that document that we're all working on together that has the best resources. And they have some people who quality assure it and check it, but it's the place we can all share. So actually it's using tools we've known about for a long time, actually, but helping people become aware. I think I also see there are some really interesting companies springing up around video technology, for example. One of the ones that I know has been around for a while is one called Iris Connect, and they have a system where they have a camera at the back of the room and it tracks the teacher who wears a microphone, and as the teacher moves around, the camera tracks them, and they can put a separate microphone on another desk so they can listen to the teacher or they can listen to the children on that desk. I've seen other systems. There's a company called Onvu, ONVU, who put cameras like sort of fisheye lenses in the ceiling of the room, and that enables you to get a real kind of 3D feel of what's going on in the room and pan around and zoom. I've seen little devices called swivels where you can put your own iPhone or iPod in the back, and again it's a small device that tracks it and records it on the iPhone. I think these are very exciting. Importantly for all of them, they all focus on trust, and they say, look, this can't be used by school leaders, school principals, to sort of be a big brother and monitor the teachers. This has got to be video owned by the teachers, and it can only be shared with their permission. And I think all of these companies quite rightly are saying this has got to really feel like it's empowering teachers and not just a way to monitor them and put yet more burden. So I think it's very exciting seeing some of these companies springing up, and they seem to be growing very quickly now as schools realize the power of having video technologies and sharing technologies working across schools.
Okay, interesting. And David, we mentioned earlier about some challenges and the issues, the cost of bringing the technology to the classroom, and again, the teaching. And what about these technologies you've just described? Can you tell us, the listeners a little bit more if the technology is affordable, if any training provided by those companies to show teachers how to use it and get them much faster on the track in implementing it in the classroom?
Well, I mean, that's exactly the right question to ask, and I've seen successes and failures. The successes happen where the school is really clear what their plan is before they bring the technology in, and they've got buy-in from the teachers, and they work with the companies to audit their technology, they train up their technicians, they train teachers, they have ongoing training. And at that point, once they say, you know, we might spend a few £1,000s on licenses and equipment, for example, but actually we'll then get lots of value out of it. But I've also seen schools who got very excited. They saw someone stand up from one of these companies. They bought the equipment not knowing what they were going to do, and then it sits in a cupboard or the license is never used. That's because they didn't train people. They didn't do that rollout properly. So to be honest, it can suffer from the same problems as anything else. The other thing I've definitely seen is if there are schools where, frankly, there's a culture of fear and there's been a long period where there's been a battle between the school leaders and principals and the teachers themselves, and the unions are very angry at school leaders and the leaders are angry at school unions, then if you bring a camera into that environment, it's toxic. And they think, wow, this is just being used to try and capture evidence of how bad we are and, you know, use it against us. And I've seen some really sad stories where, you know, people have really rebelled against it, because it's got to have the right culture in the background. It's got to be trust. It's got to be a real professional environment where people feel there's respect. So I've seen successes, I've seen failures. There are no panaceas. You know, there's no silver bullet, even around technology for teacher development. You've got to do the hard work. You've got to do the preparation. You've got to have the ongoing support. And you know, when you do that, then actually, yes, spending some thousands of pounds on these things, I think, can offer quite good value. But if you buy it and spend the money and then don't follow up and don't continue to lead it properly, then, you know, you're never going to see the value there.
That's right. Yes, that's absolutely right. And I have another question for you. Now, the innovative technologies such as robotics, the artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D printing are coming out. How do you feel about those technologies? And what is maybe your experience as having such a strong technological background and being ready to use the innovative available technologies yourself?
For me, I think these technologies are very, very young. And even though, you know, some of the things, virtual reality, etc., has been around for quite a long time, I still think it's a pretty immature area. And the reason I think it's immature is I think the technology that's available quite cheaply for schools to use is not necessarily of particularly high quality. I think there's a lot of technology out there, but what hasn't yet happened is the investment in how do we make this work in the classroom so that it's not just replacing another activity, it's strengthening existing activities. And I think at the moment, the only time I've seen people use, you know, something virtual reality, it tends to be quite gimmicky. It tends to be, hey, we're going to do something with VR. And most of the times, honestly, I mean, I've not seen a lot of these examples, but every example I have seen, I've generally thought, you know, you could have done that much more effectively, more quickly and more cheaply without the virtual reality. I think there will be a few examples right now, but it needs a lot more work before schools are ready to do this. And what I don't think we should do is tell schools you must use virtual reality to solve these problems. I think we also, you know, need to understand that the equipment has to be really, really robust, you know, 99.9% uptime, surviving things being dropped, thrown, put into water, because, you know, these are students, these are children in many cases, and they won't necessarily treat this stuff well. And you can't have delicate equipment in classrooms. It just doesn't work. You spend a lot of money and then it breaks and then, you know, you haven't got the money to replace it. So I think for a lot of these things that needs to happen. Where I have seen some great work is around 3D printers, and I know there are lots of design technology departments across the country who've got 3D printers, and they're really helping students do great work, visualizing work, creating models. And again, I know there's all sorts of things I don't know about in this area, but I've certainly seen the 3D printing is definitely taking off. Artificial intelligence, that is another one which I think we're really the early days of. I don't think I've seen much yet that is really helpful. I've seen some online learning platforms that claim to have an artificial intelligence support, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And in most cases, it feels very weird. It's not helpful. And in most cases, when I've tried to interact with anything like this or watch someone else, I kept thinking, do you know what? I think students would much prefer a real person. So for me, I think a lot of these technologies are really early days. People should keep imagining what the solutions could be, but they also realize that if it's going to work in the classroom, it's got to be cheap. It's got to be very robust. It's got to be making existing teaching better, not just replacing it. And also, ultimately, it's got to be really supporting teachers and not trying to replace them. Because if we have just another wave of people who are overexcited, imposing what they want to happen on schools, you're just going to get rejection. So, let's not do it wrong this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your opinion. It's very valuable. And maybe at the end you can give 2 or 3 advices of what the schools should be looking for when they do decide to bring the innovative technology to the classroom.
Sure. So, the thing is, before you buy the technology, before you even think about it, spend time with teachers saying, what is it you're dealing with? What is it that you can't do? And is there any technology that could support that? Find the ones who want to be the champions, pilot it slowly and carefully, audit their technology infrastructure and support that you've got and make sure that's going to be up to scratch for several years, and then get the technology. So that most of the important work happens before you even get the technology into the school. And then it's maintaining it, monitoring it, evaluating it, always checking with teachers. Is this working for you? What extra support do you need? So it's, if your technology costs £1,000, you probably need at least a £3,000 investment with £1,000 of training and £1,000 of infrastructure support for each £1,000 you spend on the technology. So I think as long as schools are realistic with the work that needs to go on before and during and the amount of extra resource they need to make that valuable, then I think we can see some real success. And for me, there's so much that we can do to improve the training, not just teachers sat in a room and listening to someone lecture them with PowerPoint slides, but it's got to be something where the teachers can solve problems themselves. They apply it to their classrooms, they have a go, they come back, they get more support, they evaluate the impact, they see other people using it, and they create communities over a period of time where they learn and develop great confidence using this technology and equipment.
Fantastic. Well, David, thank you very much for being with us today. It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure. And I hope that your valuable advices and your opinion will also be valued for teachers and educators around the world and heard.
Thank you very much. And if I may, just very briefly put a plug. So my colleague Bridget Clay and I have just written a book called Unleashing Great Teaching, the secrets to this teacher development. And it's out in April with Routledge. And obviously, I'd love it if people would consider having a look at that, because I think it's got lots of ideas to distill about how we help teachers learn things. And I think if we can get that teacher learning alongside the technology, we could get some really powerful work going on.
Well, thank you very much, David. And it's been a pleasure to have you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the podcast.
Everything changes.